Keeper, and welcome back to On Air. Glad you could join me. Wrap your mind around this for a second. Seriously, wrap your mind around this. Direct selling. Your community, your industry is on the verge of becoming a political superpower. As direct selling owners and companies pour millions into political campaigns, we're talking about companies and owners from Amway, Nu Skin, For Life, Melaleuca, Forever Living, Monavie, USANA, and more. They thrust direct selling into the political spotlight. Today, in an exclusive interview with Direct Selling Association President Joe Mariano and Direct Selling Association Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer Amy Robinson, they join me here on Air today to talk about direct selling in politics beyond 2012. We talk about the Direct Selling Association's Political Action Committee, how the DSA actually works with legislators to expand and protect your business. We also talk about how and why it is important that the over 16 million distributors in the USA get involved in the political conversation. We also talk about the special edition, the new edition to the DSA's website. You're going to love this. Champions of Direct Selling. Over 70 political legislators who support direct selling. You can now find out who they are on the DSA's website. We talk about these issues and more here today on Air, special edition, Direct Selling in Politics Beyond 2012. Welcome back to On Air. As I said, we have two, fantastic guests. We have Joe Mariano, President of the Direct Selling Association, DSA, and Amy Robinson, Vice President. And Amy, help me with this, because from time to time I see different titles for you, because I know that you changed. But you are Vice President, and you are also Head of Communications.
I'm Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer.
Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer for the DSA. These are two people that I have the utmost respect for in direct selling. They represent what I tend to look at and call the grandfather, the #1 association in direct selling, and that is the DSA. As those of you know, I've been talking a lot about it for years, and it is, as I said, a great honor to be able to speak to Joe Mariano and Amy Robinson about this. So we have a few questions, and it's basically just going to be an overview. We're not going to get into any names. We're not going to get into any companies. We're going to talk about the impact of direct selling and the influence of politics, because it's really going to change the dynamic of who we are and where we go. So let's jump into this, because we want to honor their time here. Joe, let me ask you, how is direct selling currently influenced by politics, and what are the positive implications of that?
Well, Keeper, one of the missions, if not the primary mission of the association, is to protect and promote the industry, the direct selling channel. And one of the reasons that we moved to Washington, D.C. back in 1969, after many years elsewhere, was in fact to have a presence here in Washington and a visibility among public policymakers and office holders. Mm-hmm. And since that time, that's what we've been committed to, making sure that there's a voice for direct selling here in Washington, D.C., in the nation's capital, and in state capitals around the country. Obviously, we're advocating on behalf of the individuals who sell for us, the companies that we represent, and the opportunities that they're bringing to the whole economy. So if you're not speaking to the government, if you're not speaking to public policymakers, you can't have any influence on that process, and really that's what we're paid to do at the association.
I completely agree. As you know, and you and I have had the opportunity to speak a couple of times, I absolutely think this convergence of politics and direct selling in a more visible way is going to be something outstanding for us. It's going to cause us to have more reach and more depth. And at the end of the day, it's going to have a better opportunity for people to have a greater understanding of who we are. And as an industry, certainly from a distributor standpoint, the power and the strength and where we could go. So let me ask you, how does DSA work with these legislators to enhance the understanding of direct selling? How do you actually do it? What is it? What are the mechanics of it?
Well, actually, there are a number of ways that we try to do this, and I'll just differ with you a little bit in terms of the use of the word. I don't think it's so much involved with politics per se. It's really involvement with policy, making sure that policymakers know who we are and what we do and the impact that we have in their community. So how do we communicate that? Well, interestingly, we just finished a few weeks ago a direct selling day here in Washington, D.C., where we had executives from our companies go up to Capitol Hill and spend the entire day literally walking the halls and talking to legislators and their staff about our salespeople, about the businesses that we run, about our domestic sales and activities, about our global activities. And, you know, that kind of thing, as basic as it sounds, is a real eye-opener for policymakers.
Agreed.
Now, similarly, since we have so many issues even outside of Washington, D.C. and the states, we've done that type of activity in other state capitals, most recently in Sacramento, where you're located, in California, obviously. And, of course, on an ongoing basis, even when we can't have 20, 30 or more executives who spend the day talking to legislators, the DSA staff and some of our colleagues in the companies will, of course, engage in activities on specific legislation where we'll go and talk to the person who's introduced the legislation and say, look, this is the way it's going to affect not only our businesses and our companies, because, frankly, that's less of a concern for policymakers than it is how this thing might affect the individuals who sell our products. Right. Many of the people who are listening and watching you right now. So, you know, when it comes down to it, it's a very basic thing. I mean, and that is how democracy works. You're actually talking to people who cast the votes and saying you need to be informed as to how this works.
Right.
You know, I guess in the most fundamental form, we are lobbyists, and even though that term has a bad connotation perhaps for some people in the country, the fact of the matter is what we do as lobbyists and as advocates is inform and educate policymakers about this huge industry and the things that otherwise they might not be aware of.
You know, I agree with you when you say the word lobbyist, but the fact of the matter is we're all lobbying. We're all advocates for something, no matter what it is. If we're talking to our kids, talking to our parents, talking to our bosses, we're all advocating something, which is always, I think, a good thing. Because, I mean, it's an exchange of ideas. And one of the things that you just touched on was making politicians and those people who make policy aware of the individuals in direct selling, because there's an extremely large segment that could be of value to them as well, as long as they are of value to us. And that happens to be in the way of votes. And everyone's looking for votes. So you're absolutely correct. If I could just segue into something, I don't want to get into this in a very deep way, but I have talked about it, and a number of people watching this show have asked me about it. And it's about the Direct Selling Association's Political Action Committee. I know, and you know, after some discussion, that distributors cannot get directly involved in the Political Action Committee because there are legal issues at stake here. My question to you about it: how can distributors come up with a way to support you and your efforts? How can we somehow get the word out to distributors to, number one, be more aware of what's going on, but also, come up with a way that they can support you? It may be something that happens to take place later on down the line, but how can distributors help?
Sure. Well, I appreciate the question. First, you know, we do have a Direct Selling Association Political Action Committee, and for those people who don't know the details of that kind of thing, that basically is an entity that's set up under the law that can make contributions to federal political candidates based upon the contributions that are made to our PAC. And what you were talking about, the legal restrictions, actually distributors can get involved. Anybody can contribute to our PAC. But because of the details of the law, we're actually restricted as an association as to whom we can ask to make contributions to our PAC.
Okay.
It's a little bit complicated, but the fact of the matter is, we would love to have people contribute to the PAC, so in turn, we can then support candidates who understand and have an appreciation of direct selling.
Well, maybe that's where I come in. Maybe it's where someone like me and other media in direct selling comes in.
Sure, but, this is my own personal feeling. Look, I'm not naive. I understand how politics, and that's what we mean, politics works. In order for candidates to get their message out, they need money, and so there's a constant give and take for political contributions. Obviously, you see that. But my personal belief is that while money is important to the politicians, it's not as critical in doing what we do, and that is getting the message to the politicians and the policymakers.
Exactly.
So while we're involved with the Political Action Committee, which is actually by the scale of these things relatively small,
right,
what's really important is getting the message to these folks. And distributors and salespeople can have a real impact in that, not just by making a political contribution, whether it's directly to a candidate or to the DSA Political Action Committee, but when we need people to weigh in as constituents, as voters, to say, we like this tax provision, or we don't like this provision, or we support this consumer protection legislation. And when they're asked by either us or by the companies that they sell for to weigh in, to do that is remarkably effective. Several years ago, we had a regulation that was being proposed by a federal agency, and we had some real concerns about how that would impact people in the field and their activities. And the outpouring really was remarkable on the part of field salespeople going to that agency saying, hey, you have to think about this a little bit harder and make some changes because you're going to hurt us and what we're doing, and there's nothing wrong with what we're doing. And you know what? That federal agency responded, as they did also to similar communications that came from some people up on Capitol Hill, congressmen. But listening to those office holders, and more importantly, listening to almost 20,000 people from the field who had weighed in, actually had more impact than anything else we could have done. So that's what I would really urge people to consider.
And it always will. It always will. The voice of the people, as it rises and bubbles up, it makes themselves heard and known. That's when they pay attention. And we're going to get into that in a few minutes once we talk about the champions of direct selling. And a lot of this, I imagine, will be more directed to Amy Robinson. But what you're talking about is absolutely key to, I think, the future of direct selling. From your standpoint, as more and more direct selling owners and companies get more involved in the whole public policy debate and politics and all of this, how will that help distributors? So that they understand how that will help. I happen to think the more they get involved, whether or not I agree with their positions or not is irrelevant, but the more they get involved, the more politicians begin to recognize who we are and what we're all about. So for distributors, why is it so important that they get involved with this, even though they might not have the leverage that, say, a company or an owner does?
Well, you're absolutely right. Look, we had 16 million people or so who sold for our companies back in 2011. That's about 13.8% of households basically had somebody in their house who sold directly. That's a remarkable penetration, and it also translates into about anywhere between 35 and 40,000 sellers, direct sellers per congressional district. And to have these office holders become aware of that is absolutely critical, and one way for that to happen is for the companies and their owners and founders and executives, as well as the field themselves, to really get involved in government and public policy and in politics. And the more we can do that, the better. Now, the reality, though, also is, Keeper, and you know this, with 16 million people, this is a remarkably diverse group of people in terms of their political views.
You are not kidding.
Yeah, and that's right. That's the way it should be. I mean, 15 million people is larger than many nations.
That's right.
So, and that's going to be true of the company founders and folks who might get involved as well.
Right.
But what is important is their involvement and the visibility as an important, articulate voice that presumably shares many things in common with other direct sellers, even though the variety of political views may be diverse, on key things that we believe in, the value of this channel, the importance of preserving economic freedom and entrepreneurship, the ability of direct sellers to do their business without too much government regulation or inappropriate regulation. These are things that I think almost all of these founders, and for that matter, people in the field, have in common. So to have a company executive be involved. And the thing is, and I know you've talked about this in some of your other programs, you don't have to be a huge player and a multi-billionaire in order to be involved and to have an impact and effect, positive and helpful to direct sellers. And that's true. You know, what you may or may not know is that most of the companies in the association, in the Direct Selling Association, are actually small to mid-sized companies. Sure, we have Fortune 500 companies, but the voice of those small business people is absolutely critical and extraordinarily influential and persuasive when you're making public policy arguments to these folks. When this will be broadcast, folks may have seen the presidential and vice presidential debates, and you'll see that all of these candidates are always speaking to the impact of what they're doing and trying to do on small business and individuals and entrepreneurs. And in fact, that's quintessentially who we represent. So the involvement of those people is absolutely critical.
And I completely agree with you. Right here, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we are going to get more into the Direct Selling Association's Champions of Direct Selling. They have unveiled on their website an outstanding, and I don't know any other way to put it, an outstanding list of legislators who support direct selling. They come from just about half the states in America, and there's another half that really needs a little push when we come back. Welcome back to On Air. Here we have Amy Robinson and Joe Mariano of the DSA. We're going to get into this really quick. As a lot of you know, I've been talking about politics a long time as it relates to direct selling, and I think we need to be very much involved in that conversation. And Joe Mariano and I imagine Amy both feel the same way. What has happened recently, and that I happen to just come across, is on the DSA's website, that's DSA.org, DSA.org, they've unveiled a section called Champions of Direct Selling. These are legislators, politicians, policymakers who are in support of direct selling. And we're going to talk to Amy Robinson a bit about this. Amy, there are a number of very powerful, high-profile policymakers and legislators who support us, like Senator John McCain of Arizona, Republican House Majority Leader Eric Cantor of Virginia, retiring Texas Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson, Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz from Florida, Representative Emmanuel Cleaver of Missouri. These are some very powerful people that support us, and I don't think very many people know this. And on the website, you have listed a very bipartisan group that are supporting us. What made you decide to do this?
Well, it's really important to make sure that we're always on top of legislation that's pending both at the federal, state, and local levels. And we really felt that it was important to continue to educate people about those legislators who really are standing up for direct sellers. And there were a couple things in particular that we focused on when we made the first part of our list, which actually we first did the site back in 2008, and then did a kind of a redesign of it in 2010 to pretty much what you see today. And by the way, that can be found at legislativerecognition.dsa.org, which is the direct URL for that. And so really we looked at a couple things. Several years ago, the FTC had put forth a proposed business opportunity rule, and we had a number of members of Congress who signed a letter to the FTC to express their interest in making sure that that process was handled appropriately, and that all interest in that discussion were taken into account. And so we were very thankful to those members of Congress who supported us in that way. In addition, more recently, there was an issue with a health care bill that has some very specific requirements with regard to people who receive 1099s, direct sellers. And we had people who were very active in looking for the repeal of those burdensome requirements. So again, definitely appreciated the support there. But, I think even those are very specific instances, but really, in a much broader sense, we're really looking at people who support small businesses and support small entrepreneurs who really are, fighting for their families and making income that really, helps support them. And the recognition by these individuals of the importance of supporting the small guys really is important. And, it's interesting when we go and talk to legislators, more times than not, both with the legislators and their staff members, we will hear at least once in every visit, oh, my mother was an Avon lady.
Isn't that something?
My sister this, or, they all know somebody who was part of direct selling and who benefited from direct selling, and they've all got some kind of a personal story about direct selling. And, that's a great entree for us to start describing to them why direct selling is so beneficial to individuals and the economy. But, so beyond that, we just want to make sure that we're bringing all of the great things that direct selling does to the attention of constituents who are ultimately the ones who make the decisions at the polls.
Right. It's absolutely amazing the number of lives over the 100+ years that direct selling has been doing what we do, the hundreds of millions of people whose lives we've touched, even though there are a large portion of that segment that is not directly involved in direct selling, but they have an aunt or a grandmother or an uncle or brother or sister that has somehow been involved directly, or they've been a customer. To what you talked about earlier, the number of rather, how do I say this? Let me just back up. In looking at the list, the states that are showing representatives that support direct selling, there are some 25 states that are not on the list, and we're talking about Washington State, Oregon, Nevada, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, Louisiana, Ohio, West Virginia, District of Columbia, D.C., Delaware, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, North Dakota, South Dakota, Kansas, Oklahoma, which is interesting considering it's a very large, very successful direct selling company there, Minnesota, Iowa, Arkansas, Wisconsin, and Kentucky. If you're a direct seller and you want to get your legislators aware and involved in these states that are that don't have anyone that's representing us currently, how would you suggest we go about it? Just calling, and I know you'd probably love to have some sort of mechanism in place, but how can distributors help you do what you need to do to get some of these other states on board?
Well, Keeper, this is Joe. I'll take a first crack at that if I can. I think, first of all, even though those states may not have anybody in our legislative champions recognition page right now, you're right. There are companies that are located in those states, and obviously we have sellers in those states, and many times they will have relationships with individuals.
Okay.
So don't assume necessarily that there isn't somebody there who has an understanding or an appreciation of direct selling. They just may not have made it to our recognition page yet.
Okay.
But your question's still a good one and a fair one, and I think there are a couple things that we do and do recommend be done. First, we have a legislative outreach program so that our companies that are in those states or have facilities in those states, perhaps headquartered there, will invite and do invite federal and state office holders to come in, take a look around at the company, meet the employees, perhaps some field salespeople who might be there. And that's actually been a very helpful program to us. Again, we're not necessarily asking policymakers or office holders for anything. We just want to get to know them and for them to get to know us, and that's very helpful. Mm-hmm. And as you suggest, independent business owners, individual direct sellers, small business people, or just part-time sellers can do the same thing. I personally, myself, for example, have gone in and asked my congressman if I could bring in my then 3 sons to meet him and sit down, and he was very gracious. He knew I was a constituent. I went and talked to him about, my concerns about the community. He gave us 45 minutes in his office.
Wow.
Me and my 3 sons. And that, it's not as extraordinary as it sounds, and it's particularly doable, of course, even with your own local city council or
right.
your county council or your state legislator, who is usually obviously very much closer to you geographically and really closer to the people. So those kinds of conversations are extraordinarily helpful, and of course in the context of direct selling, to be able to go have that conversation and talk about your concerns, your interests as a seller are very important and helpful. Now, at the same time, I have to recommend that people know what they're going to say. Very often, you might only get a few minutes, not
right.
the 45 minutes that I got, and if you don't have an issue, you can just say that. A communication, a letter, an email, just, dear Senator or Representative, just want to let you know we're watching your career closely and glad for your support or your interest in issues that affect direct sellers or small business. That kind of communication can be very helpful. So keep that in mind as well.
Yeah. I know we're just about out of time here. I would like to ask you, is there anything else that you'd like distributors watching this to know? I am in full support of what you are doing as it relates to trying to engage and increase the voice of direct selling as it relates to the public policy debate. And as you know, I'm going to be very much involved in this for a long time. And I am willing to offer whatever support that I can to help you in your efforts to make that happen. In closing, is there anything you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, I would, and I think I can speak on behalf of the not only the association, but all of our member companies, and indeed the industry. Back in 1975, way back then, the leaders of the association at that point said something, and we've held to that position ever since. They wanted us to be the most progressive, consumer-oriented association and industry in the country. What that meant, how that manifested itself, was that we needed to do the right thing as an industry, to recognize that we had a higher level of responsibility for business ethics and marketplace behavior and public policy. So consequently, when Amy makes her advocacy positions clear to the press or to public policy holders, and when we go and lobby or otherwise advocate in state capitals or here in Washington, it's always with the following things in mind. That yes, of course, we want to represent direct sellers, both companies and individuals, but we also want to do what's in the public interest. And the vast majority of time, there's absolutely no contradiction between those things. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to do the right thing for the country, the right thing for our folks who are sellers, and the right thing for the businesses and the companies that are members of the association. And that's a real pleasure, and I want everybody for whom we work, all of you listening and watching, to know that that is our position. Of course, we're going to try to legitimately minimize whatever tax burdens we have to bear, and that's perfectly fine and understandable. But ultimately, everything we do, we believe, is in the public interest, the joint interest of the public and direct sellers.
Outstanding. Amy Robinson, Joe Mariano of DSA, thank you very, very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
No family can survive on 2 incomes anymore, let alone 1. If you are supplementing your family's income working from home, then tune into The Cash Flow Show, Direct Sales Radio. Host Deb Bixler brings you sales tips, lead generation systems, and best business practices that guarantee direct sales success. Whether you're looking for a little extra cash or a career change, The Cash Flow Show, Direct Sales Radio will give you proven systems that will work in your home business. The Cash Flow Show, every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time on World Talk Radio Variety.
A special comment before I go. This month, Direct Selling News, the publication for executives, came out with their very first list of what they call the most influential women in direct selling. But let me give you a little history on this. 5 years ago, when Direct Selling Live originally launched our Power 50, the list of the 50 most powerful, most influential people in direct selling, at a Direct Selling Women's Alliance event here in California, I happened to run into Video Plus owner and owner of Direct Selling News, Stuart Johnson. When he came by the booth, he looked at the list and kind of laughed at it. He said, "Oh, that's funny. No one in direct selling will ever pay attention to a list like that." My comment to him was, "Oh, really? We'll see." So over the past 5 years, Direct Selling Live has launched the Power 50. In 4 years, we've been doing our list called The Women of Power, the Power 30, the 30 most influential women in direct selling. This month, Direct Selling News decided to launch their very own list called The Most Influential Women in Direct Selling. If the name isn't crazy enough because it copies our list, the women on the list, who are no doubt extremely powerful and well-deserving, but the women on this list leaves out some very, very powerful women. And it makes you wonder, what is this list really comprised of? Well, as we looked into the list, we found that this list is really about women who are executives of direct selling companies. It does not talk about other associations. It doesn't talk about other media. It doesn't talk about consultants. It doesn't talk about trainers who could be extremely powerful and are extremely powerful. For instance, it doesn't even mention Nikki and Grace Kihohoho of the Direct Selling Women's Alliance, the DSWA, the largest associated for women in all of direct selling. It doesn't even mention Amy Robinson of the DSA, Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer, who was just interviewed here a few minutes ago. She's not even on the list. If she's not on the list, no one can be on the list. It doesn't even mention Josephine Gross, co-founder and editor of Networking Times, the largest generic training magazine in all of direct selling. How do you leave off some of these well-deserving women and call this the most influential list of women in direct selling? This is appalling. I also think it's insulting for those women that, like I just mentioned, like Amy Robinson, who's extremely powerful and extremely influential and has been for a long time, as well as Nikki and Grace Kihohoho of the Direct Selling Women's Alliance and Josephine Gross, and there are many others. If you're going to have a list that's called the most influential women people in direct selling, you need to make it a real list that goes beyond those people who are members of the Direct Selling Association, whose companies are members of the Direct Selling Association. Otherwise, you do the entire industry a disservice. And you also do your magazine, your publication, a disservice, because it's really not about the most influential people. If you want a list of the most influential people, go to Direct Selling Live and look at our Power 50. It makes no difference what your sales are, what your company rank is, how much you do in revenue, how much you do in recruiting. It's all about your power and influence, and can you go beyond? Can you transcend direct selling in some way? What's also most interesting when you talk about transcending, how is it that you leave off Tracy Lynn of Tracy Lynn Jewelry, the largest female black-owned company in direct selling? How could she not be on this list? You talk about power, you talk about influence. What she represents to millions of blacks in direct selling cannot be underscored, which is also very interesting because the publisher of Direct Selling News happens to be black himself. I don't get it. There are so many women that need to be on this list, but it's coming from Direct Selling News, and Direct Selling News only caters to companies that are in the Direct Selling Association. As you can see, my previous conversation with Joe Mariano and Amy Robinson, these are some fantastic people. These are some extremely open-minded people. I have nothing but good things to say about them, even though there are times when I challenge them, just like I challenge everyone else. But for the Direct Selling News to come out with a list called the most influential women in direct selling, definitely copying Direct Selling Live, which is pretty funny, that only leads me to say, you guys must be struggling. You guys must not be moving forward with your sales. I understand you're not the most creative people in the world. You do most of your business by copying others. But if you're going to talk about women who are the most influential, and in this political season, when women's issues are at the height of every conversation, you need to expand, you need to look beyond, and you need to deliver the proper and correct list. Have a good day.